So good afternoon everyone. I am JMA Clarinan from Group 1, and for this afternoon we are going to tackle about the British Isles. Specifically, we are to discuss two main literary pieces entitled Beowulf and King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. So first, let us talk about the British Isles. So when we say British Isles, it is a group of islands off the northwestern coast of Europe. So the group consists of two main islands, the Great Britain and the Ireland. And also it consists of the numerous smaller island groups, including the Hebrides, the Shetland Islands, the Orkney Islands, the Isles of Sicily, and the Isles of Man. So these islands that surrounded the Great Britain and Ireland are specifically smallest island that is also part of the British Isles. So why is it called British Isles? So the term British Isles entered the English language in the late 16th century to refer to Great Britain, Ireland, and the surrounding islands. Of course, the islands that I have talked about earlier, the smaller islands that surrounds the Great Britain and Ireland. So in general, the modern notion of Britishness evolved after the 1707 Act of Union. So let's proceed on tackling about the literature of the British Isles. So the literature of the British Isles has been one of the central collecting areas from the early days of the library, and the scope ranges from the 14th century through World War I. So that's the time that the literature of the British Isles that cater. It's from the early days of the 14th century up until the World War I. So the strength of the collection lies in literary text rather than a literary criticism. So their literature mainly tackles about it focuses more on the literary text rather than a criticism. So it is somewhat like they depend on what is really written on the literary piece. So in printed works rather than manuscripts, in original from rather than reprint. So as what we have observed in our literature of today, there are a lot of versions. We created a lot of translations with some of the literary piece. Meanwhile, in the British Isles, they focus on the originality of the literary piece. Have a they do not have any versions of it. They prefer the original version of their literary piece. So while secondary materials have been collected at varying levels over the years, the focus has always been directed to primary materials. So as what I've said, they focuses on the primary materials rather than varying on some of the another version of the literary text or copying any version of the literary text. So within the broad strength of the English literature collection, particular strength is reflected in the following areas. Prose fiction, especially to about 1,760 texts of all major and many minor writers with multiple editions, and many works by women, Elizabethan and Restoration drama. So imagine if a certain country, or imagine the British Isles, they promote highly original piece of their own works. So imagine how strong that could be. How strong are their literature during that time that they can even produce 1,760 texts, and that includes the major and minor writers of their time. Even if they are from the past, they are from 14th century up until the World War I. So in early English translations of classics and continental literature, 18th and 19th century periodicals and poetry. So the titles in the Pollard and Whitgrave, Wing, and English short title catalogs are well represented in Newbery holdings. So during the British Isles, as what I have said earlier again, they prefer more the originality, but as time goes by, we are slowly diverging and we are slowly going into progress. There are a lot of works that copied or create a different version of their works also. So now let's proceed with the two main literary pieces during the British Isles, entitled The King Arthur and His Knights of the Round Table and The Beowulf.
So now let's proceed to the story of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, written by Rogelin Lancelin Green. So, Rogelin Lancelin Green was a British biographer and children's writer. He was an Oxford academic who formed part of the Linking's Literacy discussion group along with C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. He was born in 1918 in Norwich and died in October 1987. So the other works of Rogelin Lancelin Green are The Adventure of Robin Hood and The Tales of the Greek Heroes. The setting of the story was King Tales of the Greek Heroes, Arthur's Castle, in Camelot, England. So the time is around the 5th and 6th centuries. Major characters of the story King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table are: first we have King Arthur, the son of Arthur and husband of Guinevere. Next we have King Arthur, the father of King Arthur. Next we have Queen Igraine. She was the mother of King Arthur. Merlin the magician, King Arthur's most trusted advisor, prophet, magician, and friend. Next, we have Lancelot, the flower of chivalry. He is the greatest of all knights and Arthur's closest friends. And next, we have Queen Guinevere, the wife of King Arthur. Next, we have Morgan Le Fay, is the half and older sister of King Arthur. She can change her appearance, becoming old, young, beautiful, and ugly. And next we have Sir Gawain. He was the brother of Mordred and Gareth. He was also the most prominent knight at court. And lastly we have Mordred. He was a sullen and evil knight. He wants to usurp the throne upon the absence of King Arthur in France.
So, in addition, King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table is a retelling of the Arthurian legends, principally Thomas Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur by Roger Lancelin Green. So, it was intended for children and it was first published by Puffin Books in 1953, and since then, it has been reprinted many times. So, this story predates Geoffrey Chaucer by several centuries. And the legend of King Arthur began to take shape around the 12th century. So the legends were passed down orally through generation before being written down by various authors. So here is the summary of the story King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. So King Uther and Queen Igraine had a boy named Arthur. But Merlin the enchanter took the boy and kept him safe. Then one day, Arthur was with his new foster parents, and his older foster brother, Sir Kay, asked for him to fetch his sword because he was going to Jaws during a New Year celebration. A couple of days before, Merlin set a magical rock with a sword stuck in it, and said that the person who can pull the sword out of this rock, he is the true king. Arthur went to his foster house to fetch his sword for his brother Kay. But when he reached the house, he found it to be locked and he couldn't get the sword. But he remembered that there was a sword stuck to a rock and went to go get it. He pulled out the sword with ease, and when people saw him pull it out, they couldn't believe a little child pulled it out. So Arthur put it back and let everyone there try to pull it out, but no one could take it out. Sir Arthur was crowned king to defend his country from the Saxons, people who were trying to take over their land and fight for the victory of the Logres with his trusty Excalibur, which he receives from the Lady of the Lake. As he grows older, Merlin helps him become a wise king for the Logres and shapes Arthur to become the most wisest and fairest king. Through the book, He and his knights fight for his people and take on many adventures to defend the Logres. Lancelot, one of the King Arthur's noble knights, falls in love with King Arthur's wife, Queen Guinevere, and Mordred, a traitor from the Saxons, reveal them that causes a huge war. At the end, King Arthur finds out that Sir Mordred is from the Saxons and works for his evil stepsister Morgana Le Fay, and declares war. He loses many of his knights but defeats Mordred and provides peace throughout his nation. Through the battle, he gets heavily wounded and goes to the Valley of the Avalon but is never heard of after. Some believe he has died and was placed next to Queen Guinevere's tomb, but others say that he still remains alive and waiting to fight to defend the Logres once more. The story is riddled with love triangles, betrayals, and external conflicts that threaten Camelot's peace.
So good day everyone. So for now we're going to talk about the story entitled Beowulf. Beowulf is an epic poem written by an anonymous author as it is written during the Anglo-Saxon era. So it is the longest surviving and the most important work in Old English literature as it tells the story of heroism and sacrifices in the vein of thousands of stories told throughout the human history. It preserves the ancient Anglo-Saxon language and culture. Beowulf has some important morals, so it is bravery, honor, and loyalty. So some of the themes we can actually see in the story Beowulf is courage, good versus evil, loyalty, generosity, reputation, and the heroic code. So for now, we dwell to the story Beowulf. So here's a quick summary of this epic poem. So Beowulf falls into two parts. It opens in Denmark, where King Hrothgar has a splendid mead-hall known as Europe, a place of celebration and much merriment. However, the joyous noise angers Grendel, an evil monster living in a nearby swamp. So for 12 years, the creature terrorizes Europe with nightly visits in which he carries off Hrothgar's warriors and devours them. After learning of the Danes' trouble, young Beowulf, a prince of Geats in what is now southern Sweden, arrives with a small band of retainers and offers to rid Europe of its monster. Hrothgar is astonished at the little-known hero's daring, but welcomes him. After an evening of feasting, much courtesy and some discourtesy, at one point, one of Hrothgar's men insults Beowulf. The king retires, leaving Beowulf in charge. So during the night, Grendel comes from the moors, rips open the heavy doors, and devours one of the sleeping Geats. He then grapples with Beowulf, who refuses to use a weapon. So Beowulf grips one of the Grendel's hands with such force that the monster finally wrenches himself free only when his arm is torn off at the shoulder. Mortally wounded, Grendel returns to his swamp and dies. Beowulf then displays the monster's arm in Europe for all to see. So the next day is one of the rejoicing in Europe, and a feast is thrown in Beowulf's honor. However, as the warriors sleep that night, Grendel's mother, another swamp monster, comes to avenge her son's death, and she kills one of Hrothgar's men. So in the morning, Beowulf dives into her mere, or like a lake, to search for her, and she attacks him. They struggle, they struggle in her dry cave at the mere's bottom, and Beowulf finally kills her with a sword. So in the cave, Beowulf discovers Grendel's corpse, whose head he cuts off and takes back to Europe. So the Danes rejoice once more. Hrothgar, Hrothgar makes a farewell speech about the character of the true hero, and Beowulf, enriched with honors and princely gifts, returns home to King Hygelac of the Geats. So the second part passes rapidly over Hygelac's subsequent death in a battle. It is a historical record also. The death of his son and Beowulf's succession to the kingship and his peaceful rule of 50 years. However, the tranquility ends when a fire-breathing dragon becomes enraged after a man steals from its treasure-filled lair. So the creature begins ravaging Jetland, and the brave but aging Beowulf decides to engage it, despite knowing that he will likely die. So the fight is long and terrible, a painful contrast to the battles of his youth. Painful too is the desertion of all his retainers except for his young kinsman Wiglaf, who comes to his aid. They ultimately kill the venomous dragon, but Beowulf is mortally wounded from a bite in the neck. Before he dies, he names Wiglaf his successor. So Beowulf is cremate, cremated, cremated on a funeral pyre, and his remains are buried in a barrow built by the sea. So as his people mourns his death, they also express the fear that without Beowulf, Jutland will be invaded by Narbai tribes. So that's all the quick summary of the story Beowulf